Hey guys, it's your boy Nathan, and in this week of the N3N3 podcast that totally exists, I'll be discussing the use of various elements within film that define its genre, as well as the technical aspects that define an auteur, which is a director that uses unique and iconic styles in their films, and essentially how that relates to genre theory. But what exactly is genre? Genre has a wide variety of uses, but in film it's essentially a way of classing a piece so its intended audience will know what to expect when watching it. Essentially, it's the individual elements of the film, the style, tone, meanings, and even technical aspects like camera angles and music, all of which make up the overall genre. As well as defining the target audience for a piece, it is also important when creating the story, as it not only creates expectations for the viewer, but also guidelines for the narrative to follow. For example, Guy Ritchie's 2009 adaptation of Sherlock Holmes has a very clear genre, a comedy crime caper, and that's going to be explained later on. The narrative is a major aspect of a genre. Although it is usually the genre itself which gives hints at the plot, it does work vice versa. For example, if I were to go and see a film about two guys trying to save the world by stopping a terrorist blowing up a building, I would expect that genre to be action and probably comedy, because that sounds like a ridiculous premise, to be honest. And if it were about a down-on-his-luck man falling for an out-of-his-league woman and somewhere along the line he messes up like every tired trope ever in this kind of genre, I'd expect it to be a romantic comedy. The same goes for Sherlock Holmes. Two men with a friendly rivalry, solving crimes to get to the bottom of a bigger plan. I'd expect that to be a buddy cop adventure film, which is essentially what it is, albeit in a different time period than usual. Holmes also plays in the cause and effect aspect of a narrative structure, which is one event happening which in turn causes another event to occur. Lord Blackwood, the villain, is captured and hung. The cause: Blackwood seemingly rises from the dead and causes chaos. The effect: various murders occur, which are more causes, which lead to bigger events like Blackwood's rise to power, which is the effect. The film also follows Todorov's classic three-act structure: the normality, disruption, and new normality. The film's plot revolves around Sherlock Holmes and John Watson attempting to uncover how Blackwood seemingly rose from the dead and attempt to foil his plan to convince the world he has harnessed satanic powers and that he's essentially omnipotent. So the first act is the arrest and resurrection. Act 2 follows Holmes and Watson's attempts to solve how Blackwood did it, only to get bested in a fight and ultimately arrested. Chaotic situations in London intensify. The second plot point, Holmes and Watson finding new strength and joining forces with Irene Adler, leads to the subjugation of Blackwood, ultimately ending in his death. And the new normality is a city no longer under the fear of Blackwood, and Irene Adler and Sherlock Holmes becoming sort of friends again, and Holmes and Watson made reputable again. Now, the iconography in a film is the way the film uses its settings, set design, and costuming to illustrate the genre. To the average cinemagoer, it's arguably the most obvious element in setting the genre, but also the time period. In Sherlock Holmes, the iconography is obvious: dirty old clothes and buildings, brick-laid foundations, and of course the construction of Tower Bridge. It shows not only the time period of the film, but it lets the audience know what kind of Sherlock Holmes we're in for. Holmes is shown to be not the rich, snooty man we all know so well from the books and other adaptations, but our expectations are subverted when he is shown fighting dirty in an underground fight ring, and using rather violent methods of getting the job done. It shows that the genre is not a highly intellectual, slow-paced crime thriller, but a rough and possibly comedic adventure. Now, a film can be allegorical. The allegory is a collection of metaphors, imagery, and motifs within a film that lead to say something about society, whether it be a statement about politics, religion, or even a lesson about things like life and ambition. But even the iconography of Sherlock Holmes can in itself be allegorical of the plot. There is never a scene in the film that has a clean look. Everything, whether it be the old buildings, the dirty streets, or even the messy, as it were, camera lines, shows that Holmes's world is full of corruption. A single brief shot in one scene, which is arguably the physically cleanest scene in the film, shows a waiter in a restaurant polishing a piece of cutlery, then, making sure no one sees, but of course Sherlock Holmes sees this, hiding it in his jacket pocket, as if to steal it. This by itself is not just a metaphor for the corruption Holmes sees in pretty much every situation he's in, but it adds to the overall allegorical nature that the film seems to be conveying. That corruption, for whatever intention and however petty or grand, from waiters to government officials, is rampant throughout society at every level. The overall plot of the film, revolving around the rise of technology, could be allegorical to today's society, where we rely completely on technology, and in the wrong hands, new innovations could be disastrous. Whether Ritchie intended to convey this or not is another matter, but it can be taken this way, and that's essentially what allegory is. Applying something within a film, the motifs and all that jazz, applying that to real life to see if there's a statement being made. And Sherlock Holmes seems to be making one. Now, the reason I've talked so much about Sherlock Holmes is due to the mind behind the adaptation. It's quite evident that its director has found a grounded basis for his style, but also his story elements. Most of his work, such as Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch and Rock and Roller, are all films that incorporate the Cockney gangsters as the good guys, who are essentially the underdogs of the story. Throughout these films, the same settings and lighting styles are utilised: dank council flats, broken down buildings, dark smoky pubs. But as well as his iconography, Ritchie has also developed his camera stylistics, notably in Holmes, but also evident in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. from 2015, not the 1960s TV show, because Guy Ritchie wasn't born then. Maybe he was. I don't know how old he is, I should probably have a look. Anyway, Ritchie shows Holmes deducting and pre-planning a fight in his head by using extremely slow motion footage to show how quickly Holmes thinks and assesses his situations relative to the rest of the world. The forest fight scene in the sequel, A Game of Shadows, utilises a lot of slow motion, but as well as showing Holmes' thinking process, it allows the audience to witness the devastating effects of heavy weaponry used against the protagonists, and their reactions to the effects and the death of the people who they are running away with. As well as high-speed cameras, snorri cams are prominent in this scene, which is another trademark, as it were, of Guy Ritchie's. Now, because the frame rate is so high, any action between the good guys and the bad guys would be near unintelligible. This is not the only reason why he uses slow motion, however. The firing process of a weapon named Little Hansel is shown in extreme detail, from the hand cranking to the mechanisms inside to the firing of the weapon itself. Ritchie not only gives us the grand spectacle of the process, but it illustrates how throughout all the chaos and fighting, Holmes' mind is still deducting everything around him. As he says later in the film, "I see everything. That is my curse." All in all, the entire sequence shows Ritchie's unique vision for such a complex scene, and clearly demonstrates he has found and mastered his style, however over the top it may be. And although on the surface level, people may think he uses the techniques he does just for fun, or to make the films unique, that is not the complete case. He applies the over-the-topness in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. during an escape scene, the camera pans and high-speed shots and zooming into other locations in one swift shot to give off a fun 60s vibe. Rather than sticking to traditional camera angles and motions, whether it be super quick, unintelligible cuts during fight scenes or slow panning shots for big establishing shots, Ritchie goes over the top and owns it. Lastly, the aesthetics of a film. The aesthetics are how it looks physically. Not just the iconography, but the overall style. Ritchie's films tend to add a grungy, dirty look to his camera shots to obviously add to the iconography, but also to get us down and dirty with the characters, as it were, into their world. He also likes to use very high frame rate cameras to show how jarring this world is. He's also a huge fan of colour grading, it would appear, as nearly all his films have a heavily tweaked colour palette, usually a blue or green hue, to signify that the characters' worlds aren't pristine and rich, but, as per the iconography and the narrative, dirty, and at times corrupt. In conclusion, the individual elements of a film, whether it be the iconography, the technical codes, and especially the narrative itself, are vital to telling the audience watching the film what genre it will be and what they'll be in for. They will also be able to look at a certain director's artistic choices from previous films and decide whether or not this film is for them. Guy Ritchie is a good example of this because his films are very iconic. From his colour choices to his plot elements, it's easy enough to deduct which films are his and thus predict the genre he will have chosen. Let's just not talk about Swept Away. That was a mistake.